You used to be allowed to smoke in classrooms. Alright, so this is Philosophy 216. Welcome back. Today is our first real, we start talking about the cyber part of cyber ethics class. Unfortunately, it's also, of all the cyber topics, there are parts of it which are interesting, but it also has a lot of the parts which are like the least interesting. So for some reason with this semester, we are starting with the hardest, most boring stuff, and then moving to the more interesting stuff as we go along. That's just the way it's laid out. Sorry about that. But the good news is if you survive this class, it's all more interesting from here on out. So, last time we talked about just ethics in general, what it is, why we do it, what the point of it is. And now this class, we are moving on to the practical, let's talk about how ethics applies in the cyber or profession. You can walk in front of it. It's okay. You'll just be a YouTube star.
Oh, man.
So, what is the topic for today?
Cyber ethics.
Okay, what type of cyber ethics? What's the unit within it? Professional ethics. I mean, even that's kind of a boring name, which suggests it's going to be a not as interesting unit as like cybercrime or privacy or things that we really care about. Professional ethics, but the important thing about professional ethics is that it's very important. So, this word should look familiar from last class.
Yep.
What do we mean by this one? What does it mean? What is professional? Pardon?
Perfect.
So that's part of it, is it's tied in with like I'm trying to think. Have very good at something. So that's part of it, is this very good at something. No.
The reading uses it as like secular term.
Yeah, so it's a secular term, so it used to originally mean something to do with the church, but nobody talks about that part of it anymore. It's now in like a word we encounter in our everyday lives, and when you encounter it in your everyday lives, it's generally about like people in the real world outside of the church. And in that case,
in terms of occupation.
yeah, it's tied in with your occupation. So, what do we mean by occupation? Just what your job is. So, when you're talking about your profession, you're always talking about your job. But not everyone who has a job is like a professional in a certain sense.
You are obsessed with this certain job.
So part of it is that you are very, very obsessed with it, and you spend most of your time going into it. And why do you put so much time and effort into a profession as opposed to like nobody is a professional, well actually I saw a YouTube video which kind of discounts this. I was going to say no one is a professional Domino's box folder. But there is somebody whose job, like he prides himself on being the fastest person to take cardboard and fold them into boxes. So what is it that separates a professional from somebody who just has a job and is getting paid for it?
They're good at it.
They're good at it, so this is part of it is quality. And what makes them good at it, UD?
I would rather say more experienced than good.
So there's a quality, and there's also an element in which you are experienced, and you've done it for a long time. And you have, like, well, what else is it, Mom?
Well, the reason they're trying to separate, like, a Domino's box flipper maker thing to, like, not as a professional is because of how it's viewed in society. I think also it's, I guess, it's prestige.
Yeah, there's a prestige element to it as well. And there's one like background thing behind all this. So you've got experience, and because of this experience, there's prestige and there's quality that you embody. But there's this other really big thing. What's in the background? What is it? So what are some examples of professions? This might be another way of getting to the big background thing I'm looking for. What are some examples?
A teacher.
Teacher. What are some more?
Doctor.
Doctor. That's a medical doctor.
Lawyer.
Lawyer. Let's go with a more specific business.
Officer.
Pardon?
Accountant?
Yeah, an accountant. That's a very good one. Business person is so complicated. Maybe we go with like
Police.
stock. No, let's go with like
Stock
hedge
broker.
fund manager,
Or stockbroker.
stockbroker. So what do all of these things have that say server at McDonald's doesn't necessarily have?
I think I was reading one saying you have to be able to execute or apply your profession.
Yeah, so it's an applying thing, and so it's not just like I can read about being a doctor, but it doesn't make me a doctor, it doesn't make me a professional doctor. There's a fact in which I actually have to do something.
Okay, two things. One, it's actually cash register at McDonald's.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean the person who just hands you your food, that server.
Oh yeah, you mean the waiter.
The food handler.
Handler. Oh, handler.
No, the handerer.
Our food
They're
handler.
handing you the food, so they are the hander.
And two, it's like the concept of the more you learn, the more you earn. So
Yeah.
basically education.
Yeah, so there's this education element. And at the end of the day, here's the big difference. How many of you think that with a 2-hour training, you would be qualified to, I don't know, hand somebody food at McDonald's? Not actually entering in the cash register, just literally your job is to take things and pass them. How many of you feel qualified to do this after 2 hours? How many of you think you could do it after about 15 minutes? How many of you think you could become a doctor after 2 hours? This is the big difference between a professional and the things we talk about as professions and just a simple job. Is there's this assumption that you have expertise
Oh,
in
yes.
something very difficult.
Skills.
Yeah, and it's a skill that not everybody has. So another thing, you could not really be a professional unless you are so good that the average human could never get on your level is like shoe tying. You cannot be a professional shoe tire unless you are so good at tying shoes that no other human being comes close to you. In the same way,
Or
to be a doctor, you have to go through a lot of training, and it takes a lot of knowledge, and it takes a lot of things which the average person doesn't necessarily have. As opposed to a lot of jobs, like most of the jobs I've had, anybody could have done. Like, it takes a little bit to like learn the ropes, but within a couple days you've got it down. Other jobs though take a lot longer, so much so that you need training. You have to go to school specifically for that thing. Once you learn it, you then usually have to do an internship or continued training. It's not just like once you learn how to be a doctor, you're done and you're good to go. You have to keep learning more things. You have to keep getting certified, all of these sorts of things. So that's the main difference between being a professional and just like a job.
And also like those 6 different fields or jobs, they have like high risk, high reward benefits.
Yeah, and this is also the idea behind why certain types of jobs, at least in theory, make more money than others. The idea is that to become a doctor, you're not just getting paid for your time now, you're getting paid for the fact that 1, you put in a lot of time in the past to go to school and learn it, and 2, because you had to put in so much time and effort, not everybody can do this, which makes you a rare resource. This is why you're going to get more being paid to be a doctor than to be a gravedigger. Being a gravedigger takes a lot of effort in the moment, but after you learn how to dig a hole and learn like the general rules about how deep to dig and everything, everyone can do it. It doesn't take years and years of practice. So these are the big difference. Now, there can, I think, like there's probably subtlety about knowing how to dig graves that I don't know about, but generally, you're going to make more money as a doctor than as a gravedigger because it takes a lot more training, a lot more schooling, etc. So does everyone know what we mean by professional? Okay. So, we've got ethics, we've got professional. Let's put them together. What do we mean by professional ethics? Pretty straightforward. What is it? Yeah, so it's the rules that people follow to be ethical within a particular field. So it's not just like be a good person, it's like how to be a doctor, or how to behave correctly when you're a doctor, or what to do to be right when you're a doctor, for questions that apply only to being a doctor. So it's not questions like, in our everyday lives, we run into all sorts of questions that are different from the sorts of questions that you run into when you're a doctor. So what are some of the particular questions that doctors have to deal with, which you do not in your everyday lives? You do.
like how, okay, let me like think a little further. Okay, like how do you like, you know, like most doctors like do some surgeries like within like let's say a patient is having an internal bleeding, like how do you like resolve that with from one organ to another?
Yeah, so here's the thing. How many of you have ever had to deal with somebody lying on your table in front of you, bleeding profusely out of a hole in their side? Raise them high. Anybody? Okay.
Never mind.
If you were a surgeon, would you experience this?
Definitely.
Yes, you would almost certainly. If you're any sort of doctor and you've gone through medical school, then at some point in your medical school career, you had a surgery rotation in which you had to deal with cutting open live people. And everyone who goes through medical school, and I think it's either the first or second year, you are assigned a dead body that you have to cut apart and learn how all the parts fit together. And so this is something which you do not have to go through when you are not a doctor, which means that there are going to be ethical questions around these sorts of behaviors that you don't have to deal with in your everyday lives, which doctors actually have to take the time to ask themselves and be asked and make sure they're behaving correctly. And they're things in which you would never have to think of. So what's another question, like a moral issue, or a moral, going back to a moral dilemma? What did we mean by moral dilemma from was this last class? Started last class. What did we mean by a moral dilemma?
A difficult decision between between bad and bad.
Yeah, so you have to choose between two things which are either equally, well, generally equally bad, or one is bad and the other is even worse, and you have to decide which one do you want to do. So doctors are going to run into moral dilemmas that you wouldn't necessarily run into. Like what?
Assisted suicide.
Yeah, assisted suicide. Here's one. There's something generally about you shouldn't kill people, but if somebody's been in a coma for like 2 years, and the chances of them coming out of a coma are basically zero, and this person told you or said verbally that they would like to, if they were in a coma for more than 2 years, please allow me to die, please take me off life support. This is a question which none of you have probably ever had to ask this question, or if you did, it was for somebody you knew personally, but you were never having to make this decision for a total stranger. Doctors might have to make that decision. And how you think about that is something which doctors have to decide what to do, and it's the sort of thing that you're not going to encounter. So that's what we mean by professional ethics, is asking and answering questions that come up in your profession, which the average person doesn't have to deal with. So that's what professional ethics is. Everyone on board with what it is, just generally. Now, why on earth is professional ethics a thing? Why is it that we take, like doctors take the time to ask and answer these questions when we don't ever ask them? Why don't they just go, I'm a doctor, I've already gone through enough schooling, we'll sort this out when we get to these problems? Why are there special fields for talking about these things? Glenn?
Well, specifically, as you just said, in cases of physicians, they do not have the time sometimes to make difficult decisions. They just have to automatically react.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Very often in professions, the sorts of questions you're asking, there's a time element. Let me erase some of this stuff so that we can actually. So, why? Why is there professional ethics? 1, time constraints. We spent most of the first half of last class talking about an imaginary trolley case. And we spent an entire class talking about this, and it took a while. We couldn't just go straight ahead and just, come up with like an immediate decision. If you are late, like if you are a doctor on this table, and on the table in front of you is a patient, you're not going to have time to think long and hard. You have to make your decision quickly. And very often, with these sorts of professions, we're looking at cases in which the decisions you have to make have to be done quickly and effectively, and you can't, decide like, oh, I'm going to sleep on it. If you sleep on whether or not to perform a certain surgery, the odds are this person's not going to be there in the morning. So this is part of it. There's time constraints. What's another reason?
I mean, there are some questions that are left unanswered, even if you're like a contractor in certain fields. Like, you don't know like why we should have to do this rather than doing that.
Yeah, so another thing is just
That's what I
that
said.
there are people who have been doing this for longer than you who may have encountered these sorts of situations that you've never encountered before. So another thing is just by having a general ethical, like a professional ethical system that covers an entire profession, you are tapping into the knowledge of other people who have dealt with these things before. So if you're a doctor who's never before had a case in which, say, 2 gunshot wounds come in, and you know only one of these people is going to be able to get surgery before the other one dies. And so you may never have encountered this situation, but because you live in like a rural place, but say there's a doctor who lives in like a very bad area of an inner city where there are a lot of gun violence, then maybe you can learn what other people's conclusions have been, and that can allow you to more quickly come to an answer which is better. So another thing is, let's say, pool knowledge. So it's just,
Like diverse amount of past knowledge.
yeah, diverse knowledge. So it's basically, if you wanted to do well on a test, why are you generally, if I left the room,
Sure.
and the only thing that mattered was you all passed the test, and I told you I'm not coming back, what would be a very effective way to make sure you all got good grades?
Study hard.
Study hard, but even so, what would be an even more effective way than just studying hard?
Talk about it.
Yeah, just all talk amongst yourselves. If I leave the room and no one's ever going to catch you, you may not remember it, but the odds are somebody else in the room will. And with the same idea here, like if every doctor comes to the table with some knowledge of what to do in certain situations, then everyone together is going to have a much better idea. All right, and then there's a few more. So what are some other reasons we need this? No.
I think it has to do with like the level of accountability
And what do you mean by that? Like,
that people hold for professionals.
yeah, so, and why do we generally care more about what professionals do?
Because it's the professionals. They're supposed to be they have an obligation to be
So-
professionals at what they do. So when we ask them for their advice or we need them, they're supposed to be professional.
Yeah, so here's another thing, is because they know so well, they generally, well, there's 2 elements of this. One is just there's a certain degree of professionality that goes with somebody being paid a lot of money, and you expect them to know what they're doing. Like, you don't want somebody to come in and just be like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, but, I really care, so I'm sure this is going to go well. No, they're a professional. You expect them to know what they're doing. And also, here's another element. As a professional, are they able to, what do professionals know that you, the average person, do not about what they work on? So what are some things a doctor knows which you don't?
I don't know.
Well, how to patch you up if you
Yeah,
have a gunshot.
how to patch you up. And on top of this, because they can know what it takes to patch someone up, they will be able to know when a decision is a good one or a bad one in that circumstance. So say somebody comes in and is bleeding a lot. We bring them into this room and we just put them on the table. How many of you are going to know what the right thing to do is to give them the best chances of surviving? How many of you right now feel you could do this? Would you even be able to necessarily know what happened to them? Who would be able to know what the best first step would be? Yeah, a professional, specifically a doctor or a nurse or an EMT. They could look at this person and go, all right, first thing we need to do is this. Second thing we need to do is this. Not only that, if somebody came in and we just started doing stuff to them, who would be best placed to tell whether what we were doing was the right thing? A professional. Not only can they know what to do, they can judge when other people are doing it well. And not only that, they're the only people who have the knowledge necessary to know when somebody else is cutting corners or doing something wrong. So if a doctor comes in and they are just doing surgery really, really badly to you, are you going to know they're doing surgery really, really badly? Why not?
Probably because you're in a coma.
Yeah, you're going to be knocked out. It's going to be part of it. And second, even if you did, until you've discovered that your lung is on the wrong side, you're not going to know that something's gone wrong. And you don't want to have to wait until the doctor's made a mistake. Like, until the doctor finishes the surgery, That's not the time to find out that they don't know what they're doing. You want to know before they start cutting into you. So another reason why professional ethics is important is the only people who are qualified to judge the ethic, that's not how you spell ethics, of a professional are other professionals. So for instance, if you go, you're on trial for something, I don't care what, just imagine you're on trial. Who do you want representing you? A lawyer.
A good
And
lawyer.
a good lawyer. Can you necessarily know what makes a good lawyer versus a bad lawyer? You can have some idea, but who's going to be best qualified to tell whether your lawyer is a good one? Another lawyer. And that's exactly why. And if your lawyer is just like shipping, like just mailing it in, like he shows up and just goes, yeah, I think my defendants, they're innocent because I like them. Like, you can even tell that that's a terrible argument. But there's going to be if you put enough things in big enough words, you can convince the average person that you know what you're talking about. But you couldn't convince another lawyer. In the same way, if your hedge fund manager starts telling you about all these great investments he's going to put your money into, and starts using big words and talking about the dividends and the yada yada, after a while your brain's just going to shut off because you don't know what all these words mean. But if they're just making something up, that's when another hedge fund manager or someone with expertise can tell. So basically, doctors, lawyers, these people, if there weren't other professionals looking over their shoulder,